Hi, welcome to the talk, Red versus Blue. So my name is David Hunt. I'm the CTO at Prelude Research. Found a couple of ways to follow me online at Private Ducky, which is my Git repository handle, and blogs at feed.prelude.org. Today we're going to be talking about red and blue exercises. So a lot of us on the call probably have a history of being on the offense or defensive side of these engagements. And it's the process of kind of fleshing out what security issues an organization may have by hacking into the organization, as a good person, and trying to defend against those type of attacks before an adversary may do the exact same thing, but with malicious intent. So we're going to be looking at that process a little bit more in detail, but then we're going to pivot into what we think this is be kind of an exercise. What do we think this may turn into in the future as far as red versus blue exercises and how they scale out so maybe everybody can use them? So who am I? CTO, as I said, at Prelude. I've been in the cybersecurity industry about 15 years. I built the MITRE Caldera framework version 2 and up. That is out in GitHub today. You can find that. I've also worked at organizations like FireEye, John Deere, Kenna Security, variety of kind of security shops, as well as time in OCO, doing work for the US government and a variety of other folks. I've kind of interspersed in between their time software engineering and doing management type positions at some larger companies. For the last 5 years or so, I've spent most of my time building autonomous systems designed to hack for good into computers in order to allow more access to some kind of more advanced type of security for more organizations. So MITRE Caldera, this is one project that you'll definitely be aware of that I was heavily involved in as the lead developer. This is a free autonomous C2 framework. This was designed primarily with research in mind. There's actually a slide coming up on this. The process was to identify decision-making logic and to figure out how adversaries may make those decisions in the field in order to replicate that for autonomous programs for good in the future. That led to a lot of the work that I'm currently doing on the Prelude Operator platform. And this is a free autonomous C2 framework, same as Caldera. This one is designed for production use. This is a kind of a full-fledged red and purple team product for free. Definitely encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. Who are you? So I've got a couple of assumptions as to who you may be through this talk while you're here. You probably know a thing or two about red teaming. You're at a red teaming talk, by the way. You work in security, you might be an InfoSec, you could be in a red team, on a blue team, and a purple team. You're interested in performing a red team assessment or some type of offensive security assessment in order to secure something or test if some defense is not working. That takes me to what you should learn today. How red versus blue exercises work today. I want to kind of level set, do a run through, kind of a sample red team exercise actually is what we're going to do, and just get a feel for what does it look like in today's world to do a red team. The when, why, and how automation started creeping in. So this definitely started happening where manual red teams added automation. They always have to some extent, but it started to really branch out and kind of explode in a way at a certain point in recent history. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to talk about the problem that no one's really looking at and why solving that might unlock what the actual future of red versus blue exercises look like when you start scaling it out. All right, to kick us off, let's look at a typical red versus blue exercise. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we're going to look at this clip, which may look familiar to people, The Office, and we're going to kind of level set, pay attention to the characters, pay attention to the content. This will become relevant in just a minute.
Okay, nobody panic. Listen up. Everyone, follow me to the shelter. We've got enough food for 14 days. After that,
my bad. Space heater and fan were both on high part at the same time.
It's saying the server went down. Does anybody know that password? Because otherwise we can't do any work.
Try password.
Try 000 000. No.
0000001.
Okay, I'm not doing every number.
Wait, does anyone remember when it was set up?
It's like 8 years ago.
Lord of the Rings stuff? I don't know. I'm just trying to think of things that were happening at the time. Everyone was getting their driver's license.
Why don't we just call the IT guy who set it up? What's the name of the guy in glasses?
Okay, moving backwards, our IT guys have been glasses, turban, ear hair, fatty 3, shorts, fatty 2, lozenge, and fatso. Ink, lozenge. So,
I got it. Try
you know what? It made me laugh when I heard it, but people got really excited.
big boobs.
Drama queen, nosy.
You're typing big boobs?
Try big boobs with a Z.
That's the password we're in.
All right. Yes.
The important thing is, this kept us secure, people.
All right. Now that was actually relevant to this talk, I promise. So as we look at a red team engagement or assessment, we're actually going to use Dunder Mifflin Paper Company as our sample company to attack. So obviously this is attacking for good. We want to flesh out any security issues that Dunder Mifflin may be facing that they're unaware of. And so to attack Dunder Mifflin, to kind of play out what does a red team look like? What does a red team assessment or exercise actually look like? We first are going to look at the blueprint. Now, actually, a lot of times in a red team assessment, you may start with a blueprint just like this of a physical location. You may start with the blueprint of a network. You may find stuff online. I've actually found blueprints, network diagrams on YouTube videos that are on blackboards and whiteboards in the background of videos of companies that I was attacking. Publish it on YouTube and they forget to scrub the background. So you find blueprints in all sorts of locations. Now, for our kind of fictitious red team assessment, we are going to run a exercise against Dunder Mifflin. We're going to show the red team's responsibilities, the blue team's responsibilities, and where the purple team kind of falls in this as well. And so if you're unfamiliar with the office, this may look a little bit foreign to you. If you're familiar, you'll definitely kind of jump out with a few things here. Here's Michael's office over here in the top left. And you've got the entrance to Dunder Mifflin as well in the top left, secretary's desk, and so on and so forth. Annex over here on the right. Now, this is a, maybe 10, 15 person office. You've got some people that have more technical skills, such as Ryan down here, people with less technical skills, like maybe Creed over here, and especially Michael. And what we're going to do, let's see how a red blue exercise should look. All right, so you have a blue team, usually either the full blue team or a good portion of them will come and participate in a red blue exercise. Because they're so infrequent, a couple times a year maybe, this is great practice for the blue team. They can actually put their detection abilities to the test. They can see how they would respond if an adversary came in. And so we're putting them in a public place over here, the annex. They're usually pretty rowdy. They're very visible. They're not hiding anything. They are in charge of defending Dunder Mifflin. You may have somebody over in the break room. Now on the red side, you have a lot less people. Put 3 here. Most of the red teams I've been engaged with have 2 to 5 people. You usually get stuck in a conference room, a big closet, that type of thing, kind of tucked away in the corner. Sometimes a blue team doesn't even know you're there. Sometimes they do. And we're going to say that the red team is focused in on Ryan. Their goal, we'll say, is to hit on Michael's computer to get remote code execution here. But they're focused on Ryan because they think that maybe the relationship between Michael and Ryan, based on what they could uncover in OSINT work ahead of time, they kind of discovered that maybe these two have a close relationship and maybe I can get on Michael's computer by going through Ryan. Now, they may also have their eye on the accounting department because they're in charge of, obviously, the finances, and they may have sensitive information that could be very revealing. Now, so these are 2 initial targets that they'll isolate during the OSINT phase of red teams. And maybe they start off on the finance department, they collect whatever they can do and pull off, exfiltrate a whole bunch of documents. And then they might move over to Ryan and laterally move across the network and start collecting things off his machine and then opening up, say, an RDP tunnel over to Michael's computer where they finally get their last beacon. And so the red team's kind of moving around, the blue team's monitoring the situation as it kind of unfolds. And they will either kind of toss a red flag, if you will, and say, hey, we saw you doing this. Did this actually happen? Is that a real threat? Is that the red team? We detected something. Is it a false positive? So you have this kind of communication, this chatter happening through a red blue exercise. Now, the purple team through this process is going to be situated sometimes with the red team, sometimes with the blue team, sometimes both. And they're going to be kind of helping these two sides communicate, turn value out of the exercise, and kind of be that bridge. Now, that's how a red team should go. Let's look at how a typical red-blue exercise actually goes. So looking at the same blueprint, same starting off point, you have the office and the network. Blue team over here, over in the annex, maybe a little bit smaller this time around in the real world. Red team over here in the conference room. And 2 days later, we are in the exact same position. We have made absolutely no headway. That's pretty typical. So a red team usually spends a day or two, at minimum a few hours, getting their stuff set up. They may have to reinstall operating systems to have clean OSs. They may need to establish an initial foothold, could take days. They may not be able to do anything movement-wise for a couple of day period. It happens. It's just a hitch you have to be aware of. It takes time, it costs money, extends the process. Now, whereas in the kind of the ideal case, the red team had isolated Angela, Kevin, and Oscar, finance department, and Ryan as the best targets. But in the real world, they may have to settle for what they can get. And there are constraints in a red-blue exercise, such as no touching financial data that may come up. And so the red team may not be allowed to talk to the accounting department from a networking perspective. So they may settle on Daryl. Maybe they drop a USB stick out by the garage. Daryl picks it up, walks upstairs, plugs it in. Boom, they get a beacon. So the beacon comes in from Daryl and they have their initial foothold. Now, a lot of times that first action or one of the first actions, because the blue team may be really engaged and aware of the exercise that's going on, they may notice it and immediately block the red team. That may be sign number one. Hey, red team is here. Let's go ahead and drop a firewall in an IP table change. Let's make sure that nothing communicates in or out of that conference room, essentially in the red machines. And that could be the end of the exercise. Now they've kind of boxed them in. Now, a blue teamer may pop out to the break room, pop on Twitter, and start bragging about the fact that the blue team caught the red team, and that the red team's only ability to move forward is to accept what's called a white card, essentially a cheat code, if you will, in order to proceed with their exercise. And the blue team has actually won the exercise. And that's where things start to really spiral out of control in a red-blue exercise, because there is no winning. There is often a competing type of environment because it is offense versus defense. But in the reality, nobody is there to win. And so the purple team kind of heads for the stairs because their goal is to help the red and blue communicate, come up with ways to actually do something impactful with the results. So they head out. And that's pretty typical of kind of your red-blue exercise, maybe a little bit more theatrical. But you can kind of see how this plays out in a real environment, real/fictitious environment of the Office TV show. All right, now at the end of the exercise, you now have to ask, red blue exercise complete, is Dunder Mifflin now safe? Of course, the answer to that is a little bit more complicated than it first seems. So we're going to answer a few questions in order to answer the question. So how good was the red team, first of all? If I hired a red team today and they find 10 vulnerabilities, then I hire one again next year and they find 5. Was the first team better than the second, or did the defense actually close 5 of the found holes? It's a tough question to answer in most red teams. Talent can be different on a team of 2 to 5 red teamers. Taking one person out of the equation, swapping out one of those staff members, that may change the equation drastically in the talent pool that you have accessible. Now, answering that question is also highly subjective. You're usually talking more than 5 or 10 different vulnerabilities found or security recommendations. You may be talking dozens to hundreds, and being able to classify their priority and impact can be difficult on its surface. How good was the blue team? Do they have the right detection and response tools? Were they configured correctly? Often at odds with each other. How good is the blue team actually at implementing the fixes that the red team pushes over? How good was the purple team? Are they effectively communicating with both the red and blue sides? Are they capable of performing red actions, but also capable of being able to portray that to the blue team in terms of prioritization? That leads me to what I hope is the main point of this talk today, which is the point of offensive security is to gain awareness of your vulnerabilities, your threats, and your risks, communicate that insight to your leadership, and improve your security posture. A red blue exercise is not a game, it's not a competition. It is fun for sure, but the goal here is to treat it as what it is, advanced security that is able to open up your eyes and provide awareness as to what your problems are. Then there was automation. What we've talked about to date is kind of the red team process as it looks today. When you run a red blue exercise, you're usually at a large organization, enterprise likely, maybe government, places that can actually afford to pay for the time and cost that a red blue exercise contains. So back in, call it 2015, MITRE started a research project called Caldera. And this is all based around a research paper that you can read about online. It's on the topic of automated adversary emulation and the planning and decision-making process that goes into it. MITRE published this maybe in 2015, 2016 time period. Like I said, you can find it online. The whole gist of it is adversary reasoning. How can you make decisions when inside of a network the same way an adversary would, and learn how to link them and chain them and plan over them in order to automate the red team process so you can take offensive security and make it not necessarily a manual only process, but maybe convert it into something semi-autonomous or fully autonomous one day. All R&D, heavy R&D, I definitely encourage you to check it out. And you can kind of break it down as these 1, 2, 3. How do you reason like an adversary? How do you take a limited knowledge store? Essentially, what do you know how to do TTP-wise and attack-wise? And then how do you apply it? How do you take those two things, mix them together, and perform an autonomous attack? This is the basis for the Caldera project. And you'll read lots about that online. So taking that whole concept of making human decisions, this can be taken out of the cyber range. We'll go back into cyber in a second, but let's take a step out into something even more simplistic, which is human decisions. And let's say we wake up, we're on the left-hand side, and our goal is to get to the right-hand side. We want to drive to work. Now, to get from point A to point B, we need to move across this diagram. The red square represents a square we cannot do until we satisfy a dependency. So to walk the dog, we need to put clothes on. We cannot walk the dog in my neighborhood unless we put clothes on first. So therefore we have a dependency on that one. So when I wake up, I can either eat breakfast or I can hit snooze. Cannot walk the dog. So if I hit snooze, I'm going back to sleep. That's not going to get me closer to work. So go back to the beginning. If I eat breakfast, that will then lead me to the ability to put clothes on for my my second decision. Putting clothes on now satisfies my dependency for walking the dog, which then I can jump a state and try to go for a run. That's not going to get me any closer to getting to work. So head back to walk the dog. My next jump could be to get in the car, which allows me then to drive to work. And so this is the process. Think of this as a decision tree, where you have a set of decisions in front of you. Some have dependencies on other decisions being complete. You have an initial state and you have a final goal state. Now, what I just described is actually called a finite state machine. Yes, it's math. The classic example for a finite state machine is the subway turnstile. There's two states in a turnstile, locked, unlocked. Pretty simple. That's why it's the classic example. When you put a coin into the turnstile and you push, you're changing states. You're moving from a locked state to an unlocked state. And once you perform the action, perform the transfer, you are back in the original state. Now, this is a finite state machine because there are only two states, hence finite. And you're in either one state, the other state, or in a period of transition between them. It's the same process we talked about with our human decisions, but we're going to overlay a state machine and see what it looks like. In our example, we had 5 states. As we worked our way across, we were able to go forward, backward, satisfy dependencies that opened up new states. There's no order here. It's not linear necessarily. It could be. But that's the process. We completed a finite state machine. Now to attach a little bit of cyber to this, throw a little bit of cyber on there, if you will, we're going to look at the cyber kill chain. I like using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I worked at MITRE. I think it is a great common language for people to use in the industry. And so we're going to look at the kill chain and identify what our states may be. So you have tactics, such as persistence. You have techniques, such as T1037. And you have procedures, such as this given one for persistence. So TTP. In this example, I like using tactics as states. So you may have a dozen or more potential states. Each one of those may have techniques, which you may use as states as well, creating essentially a layered or multi-level finite state machine that you can use for performing decision logic at scale. Now, this is the process. This kind of state machine process is what we use in Caldera, what I use in Operator to link and create semi-autonomous red team exercises, purple team exercises, and so forth. So let's look at what this actually, let's look at a real life example, how to hack computers. And we're gonna say this is us performing a red team assessment. We're all shady in this example, we're in the hood, and we're sitting behind our command and control center. From here, our C2 is connected to our TDP database. This is our stockpile of attacks, our TDPs, our payloads, our binaries, our essentially safe malware to run. This is all of our stuff. Now we also have rats. These are the beacons coming in over our network that are connecting in through various network protocols into our C2 and saying, I'm ready, do you have an instruction for me? In our example, our goal is going to be to steal important files. Now to do that, we may have to first find them, then create a staging directory where we plan on putting them, then stage them, in other words, we copy them from one place to the next, compress that directory that we created, and then finally exfiltrate the stage directory out of the network and onto our computer to the C2. Now the challenge in an autonomous sense is how do you take the arbitrary text output and use it to create the input for the next decision? All right, let's solve that. So let's say the first command is this find command. So if you're familiar with Bash, this will look familiar. Now what we're doing is we're locating in 3 different directories any file that's been modified in the last 1 day. Now if we run that from a shell, we pop a shell right now for a Mac or Linux, we run it, and we may get this output, something to this effect, a series of file paths, absolute file paths that represent various files that have been modified. I use this command all the time, by the way, in red teaming because it helps me zero in on what I would consider important files. Things that somebody may update frequently is usually a clue to me. Now, my next command after I ran that first one might be to copy a file into my new directory, which we'll assume is already on disk. Now, you'll notice the copy command has a variable. There's a hashtag and curly braces and a file.t1005 variable. This is representing by the way, this is representative in Caldera and Operator, if you're curious. This represents a variable that is required to run the copy command. In this case, it's required that I have a file found by a T1005 technique. So our find command above is a T1005 technique, which is locating local data, and it output files, indicators of compromise. And so those will satisfy that given variable. So what this would look like in an autonomous system would be 3 different commands. So I started off with one with a variable because I don't know, I'm filling this into an autonomous system, and it's going to generate 3 different real commands in this example. one for each of the found files. So this is an incredibly simplistic example, but hopefully highlights the power of being able to take the output of one TTP and feed it to the input of another and create really powerful chains of attacks that would be very, very similar, though not exact, as a manual red teamer popping onto a computer, running the find command, mentally parsing the output, and then generating the next action based on what they found. It's the process of automating that thought. All right, where do we stand today? Understanding the purple process, as we'll call it. Now, everything we've talked about is red blue exercise. We've talked about offensive security, talked about the automation and BAS side. So what is red versus purple? What are the differences here? So on the red side, when you're running a red blue exercise, you're focused on manual assessments. You may do them every so often. They're expensive. They take a lot of time. So you can't do them on a daily basis. And so you may say, okay, we'll do them once a year, once a quarter. If you're on the purple side, you may want to run continuous purple team assessments. Now, in a purple team, you're aiming for running a red team assessment essentially over an API, over something like a CI or Jenkins pipeline, something like a BAS system or a Caldera or an operator. And so you're hooking something up automated. And so maybe you can do it every day, every week. On the red side, you're going to be less worried about, or sorry, on the red side, you're going to be more worried about noise level, because on the red side, you're doing manual work. You may do initial access, and part of the manual stuff that you're doing is to see if the blue team can detect your presence or your ability to get into the network. The purple side, in a lot of cases, you're at a post compromised state, and you're not as worried about noise level, especially on the initial access side. You're more worried about the TTPs you're running on a one-by-one basis, and can the blue team detect each one of those actions? It's almost like an act-react type of environment. On the red side, you might use manual to semi-autonomous tools, things like Cobalt Strike, Operator, Metasploit, variety of port scanners, fuzzers, that type of thing. You may have a significant toolbox of tools. On the purple side, you're going to use tools like BAS vendors, breach and simulation. You're going to use tools like maybe Caldera, even though we never designed it for that purpose. You may use Operator. Operator's obviously in both of these, which is going to be the next thing we're going to look at, which is taking it out for a spin. So in this example, I kind of want to highlight what it looks like on the ground in a very simplistic, one-off localized set of what does a red team exercise look like from a red team perspective. And then what does a red blue exercise look like from that more purple blue standpoint? And what does it feel like? I like putting a tangible feel on it. So let's go take a look at that. All right, now let's take a look at what the process for red teaming and purple teaming might look like in the field. So we're going to start off here in Operator at the home screen, and we're going to treat this as a red team operation. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to locate agents. So opening up an agent portal, we're going to select a Linux-based agent since I'm on a Linux machine right now, and we will grab a copy. All right, downloaded that. That drops into the temp directory by default. So I'm going to open up a shell, locate my agent, start it up. We'll call it hacker, and we will give it a jitter time of, let's call it 10 seconds. And now that I have started my agent, I can pop back into my command and control and see if I have any new agents. Perfect, got one in, and I have an old one as well. So we can see one online, one offline. Now, this is kind of the process of initial access. Obviously, this is much more sped up for this. But this is the process of getting an agent on a foothold, connecting it back to your command and control center, and then being able to work with it from there. So you want to perform manual actions against it. In this case, I connected an agent over TCP, click over into it. I could connect over HTTP. I may pick a custom protocol in my manual assessment because I'm trying to get around a constraint that the environment has for me. It may block all HTTP traffic, so I may pop over to DNS. And so it's kind of a little bit of a cat and mouse game where on the offensive side, I'm trying to work around what I think the defense has and using essentially my muscle memory of what I know how to do with my own kind of personal skill set as well. First thing you do in that red team assessment, you drop the initial access, you get your beacon back, you gain control. So now I have remote code execution, RCE, against my initial foothold. Now from here, I might pop a reverse shell. It's a typical thing. So we'll go ahead and run that. And this will attempt to gather a connection to that computer in order to connect on. I may try to switch around some of my configurations, such as my encryption keys, my jitter times, and so forth. Or I may hop over and start to develop my attacks. So in my case, I'm flipping over into a code editor, and I may find, we did a recently, we collected important files before. So I may pop over here and say, you know what, let's go ahead and find that attack and edit it. Let's say we want to only look at the downloads directory, drop these out, we could save it, we're good. And I may want to run attacks from here. Other options exist within here as well that I could do from a manual perspective. But that's kind of the process of manual decisions as I am picking up an agent and working with it directly. Now, let's say I am attempting to look at this from a perspective of a purple teamer. Now, as a purple teamer, I care about the detection. I care about, I would care less about the noise level, obviously, as we talked about, but I care more about, is the defense actually picking up on things? Can I automate this in a way over an API that allows me to be hands-off and just look at the detection data? Was I able to see this? Did I catch it? Am I configured correctly? And so forth. So for that, I may select or build my own adversary chains. And so I may say, hey, let's build that file hunter chain out ourselves and deploy it. You can see that ran real fast, noise levels high, it's still out there running. I can see it's doing a few things, and it's done. Ran 11 procedures, locating files, staging files, compressing directories, and so forth. Required absolutely no brain power of myself as a manual red teamer. It did all of that autonomously. Now, it's great, it's perfect. As a purple teamer, I can now go check my defensive detection, see if we caught that, and I'm off and running. Now, I could also use this over an API, obviously, hook it up to Jenkins or other types of CI in order to engage with my attacks. I could also lock an agent, redeploy it, and then start to go through one by one and approve different actions. If I wanted to kind of play that semi-autonomous, not really doing manual red teaming, but I'm not really making decisions as a, or not making decisions as a purple teamer either. And so I may do these one-off as well. And that's kind of your process of, obviously much expedited, as I said at the beginning, but you're either manually doing things as that red teamer, curating each command and approaching the problem in a very manual perspective, or you're going to that fully autonomous, semi-autonomous purple teaming perspective. But either way, you're kind of hitting the same problem, which is a security assessment that's designed to find what your security posture looks like and be aware of kind of where you stand. All right, so that's kind of a firsthand perspective of the red and purple team workflow, if you will. Now, try to answer these questions. What skills do you think I need in order to do this and provide value at my organization? Who can actually afford to do this, to spend time, energy, money to perform a red blue exercise and gain that value? And how much time is it actually going to take me and my team in order to accomplish? These are pretty critical questions, and they speak to who is capable of running a red blue exercise, what type of accessibility there is. And you're talking large companies for the most part, some managed security in there, and some government level red teaming that can really take advantage of advanced security. Now, what is no one looking at tied directly to that question of accessibility? Red team defensive agents. Sounds like a crazy term. Let's dive a little bit in. If a red blue exercise requires offensive and defensive teams, why do we only deploy defense to production? I'll let that sink in for just a second. Really think that over. When we test development, we may toss a red team against our dev environment and have them really go to town on a handful of machines. toss the blue team in there to really see if they can, go to battle and defend against what the red team's doing. When we go up to production and we roll out 300,000 workstations to our employees, we only roll them out with an EDR, an AV. We don't roll them out with a red team agent that is keeping the blue team agent honest. How do we know if that blue team agent is actually defending us as we anticipate it is? Are all of these EDRs across our fleet, are they all configured the same way as the environment that our blue team and red team are running their exercises in? It's kind of the classic question of does the dev environment really match the production environment at scale? And if not, what are the compromises in security that you might be making there? So why aren't we looking at red team defensive agents right now? A couple of different reasons, some pretty legit. There's too many users. There's a huge logistical challenge when it comes to rolling out that many agents on a red team side to that many people. At a large organization, you're talking hundreds of thousands of endpoints you may need to roll this out to. That kind of speaks to the risk. You're rolling out essentially a RAT, a remote access Trojan, something that can run remote code execution on endpoints. Too much personal liability. When you're running red team engagements, you're looking for the unknown, which means you can't just run boxed commands. That may require liability in terms of what you might find on somebody's machine. When I've done red teaming, I've often come across machines that you find an employee that's involved in an illegal business, involved in something very personal where they're putting personal photos, inappropriate ones on their machines. You come across that, and now you have a liability situation on your hand where me as a red teamer is viewing something on a coworker's computer that they shouldn't have done, but I also shouldn't be seeing it. And so when you roll that out in an automated sense, that kind of scales up in a problem. Way too expensive to do endpoints like this in the red team sense because of all of the clauses around risk and liability you have to keep in mind. And then finally, there's no real clear way to quantify the results. In a red-blue exercise, if you're on the blue side, you're familiar with getting a kind of a stack of papers from the red team on the things you need to fix from the exercise, the after action report. Now, if you were to roll that out to 300,000 computers instead of the 10 that were under test, and you were to do continuous red team and penetration testing and adversary emulation across those machines, you may have an enormous problem that puts the logistical problem to scale. So let's look at each one of these problems and see how there may be a solution that a red team defensive agent might be able to fill. So too many users, got to fully automate that problem. This, I think, is the easiest problem of all because EDR, AV, number of different things that roll out to the endpoint, whether they are agent, agentless, process, file-based. There's a lot of precedence for how to get a system like this onto large numbers of endpoints. Now, it will require something that falls into the agent or agent-like capability, something like an EDR, because you need to be able to perform that basic remote code execution. But there's a lot of examples in terms of scale. You just need automation to do this. Second risk, or the second problem, there's too much risk. An agent or a process that is localized only is the solution. So when you're talking about the risk of allowing something to run RCE, something to run commands on somebody's computer that isn't under a red-blue exercise, well, you can lock that down by localizing the communication. So, of course, easier said than done. There are ways that you can localize your agent, make sure it cannot communicate outbound, make it an internal agent. You can also protect it and tamper-proof it under a number of methodologies. And then you can ensure that it can only execute the specified commands, give it a playground that it's allowed to run in, and don't allow it to go outside of that. There's all sorts of hashing that you can do and safety checks that you can plug in order to keep it contained to those type of commands and localized only. Now, when you think about it, we're really talking about the flip side of an EDR here as well. An EDR actually that can do detection and response has capability to run sets of commands and allowed to perform actions on the security team's behalf on the machine. And so we're really talking about the flip side of that. So there's a lot of precedence here as well. An offensive red team agent is going to gain a little bit more of a eye. People are going to pay a little bit more attention, but we're really talking about a pretty similar mirror instance of EDR here. The third problem, too much personal liability. Well, we can solve that by making sure that nothing is extracted from the computer. Nothing can be extracted. You don't want to even have the possibility of the agent, the red team agent, from porting anything, from exfiltrating anything. You want nothing. Maybe a binary yes or no did something work. That might be the extent that you would ever want to allow this. There should be absolutely no visibility of people into these endpoints, and there should be no remote shell options at all. There shouldn't be a reverse shell like I did in an early example. Next problem, too expensive. Automate. That's a solution to a lot of these, obviously, is to automate the dropping and management of your red team agent fleet. That will help a lot on the expense side. It must be accessible for a small business or individual as it is for a large enterprise or government. That means it must be completely hands-off. Similar argument to AV back in the 80s, 90s. It was not as accessible to everybody. It started rolling out to everybody. The cost started dropping significantly, and it became an actual pretty accessible and the norm to have AV. And so I think red team agents will start to fall into that category. And then the last problem set, how do you quantify the results that a red team agent may push forward? Two different things here. The red team agent should be testing your defenses, and it should act as a training program for the end user. So this is the big value add of bringing a red agent into your environment, because when you add a red agent into your environment, all of a sudden you have a red-blue exercise running on every workstation within your fleet. If you have 100,000 workstations at your larger company, you could have 100,000 red-blue exercises happening consistently and constantly as you are monitoring how well the defense is doing and how well the user is doing when it's reacting to certain actions. So instead of just having that blue team agent that sits on an endpoint, say an EDR, that is doing detect and response, the red agent will keep it honest. It will poke and prod and report any issues with the blue agent. And then at the same time, the red agent will be able to test the user. So if you're familiar with the, say, quarterly or annual security compliance testing that we all probably have to do or have had to do in the past, we click through 30 different training questions, usually about phishing and initial access and so forth, and multiple choice. And we take, as security people, we take the same compliance training as the accounting departments, the executives. We all take the same thing. Now, if we had a red team agent running, a red team defensive agent running on somebody's endpoint, that agent can poke and prod me, test me as an individual alongside the blue team agent, which is helping keep me honest. And what it will do is it can provide custom training for the individual based on their own behavior on the endpoint. So that's a phenomenal kind of value add that a red team agent can provide, because it understands what you're falling for. If the red team agent, for instance, pops a credential prompt trying to see if I will enter my credentials unprompted, and I enter them, well, it can provide an immediate feedback loop, show me a training flag, and show me, hey, there's an actual risk to doing that. And the security team can make a very good judgment as far as, does that open up any vectors? Is there any results coming from the red team agents in my fleet that correlate strongly to the results from my manual red teaming that I should be aware of? So there's a lot of value in that kind of full circle. Now let's see how this should kind of roll out, or could roll out, if you will. So as a security engineer that may be managing a red and blue fleet, I would love to have a dashboard like this. So where I could pop open a screen and view a variety of potential attacks I could run. So I may look and say, hey, I could do an implant stager. I could capture screenshots, capture audio, run a number of these adversary actions that we're seeing in the wild related to ransomware. And I may pick one, say in this case, the ransom note. I'm going to drop a ransom note on somebody's computer. Does somebody notice that it got dropped? Do they report the fact that it got dropped? Kind of like a phishing test, if you will, but for ransomware. Now I can see the attack plan, pretty simple. This is just leaving behind a ransom note for the user, schedule it out at a specific time, off and running. Now I can sit back after I schedule it and I can see detailed executions as reports are coming in, and did they work or not work essentially. And this is the detections from the defense. Did the EDR catch it? How did the user respond to it? Essentially have a dashboard where I can keep track of all of this. And then on the endpoints that I actually run this attack on, if the user falls for it, they can have a training file pop open, kind of inform them what occurred, tie it back to something relevant in the news, and try to improve the cyber hygiene of your organization person by person. As we know, people are one of the largest, if not the largest, vulnerability when it comes to security at a company. And so improving cyber hygiene along the way and giving them that kind of customized look on the fly could hopefully create a pretty big dent in security issues from the user perspective. But this would be kind of the ideal flow if I could, draw up a red team agent and a blue team agent kind of working in tandem on an endpoint, going to battle with each other and kind of keeping each other honest. Any questions?